Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's review, we are doing yet another Tavour installment. Both beer sourced from Tavour. If you've seen a lot of our reviews, you know we get a lot of really good beers from Tavour. If you haven't checked them out, I do highly recommend it. Nonetheless, for today, we are jumping into flavored stouts. Not imperials, just standard ABV stouts, but flavored. And both completely different from one another, and both from brewers I've never had any beers from prior. So I'm very excited to jump into today's. The first beer is from Stable 12 Brewing Company. This is called Basic B, and it's a stout that's been brewed with cinnamon, honey, nutmeg, and vanilla, clocking in at 6% ABV. It is also a nitro, so I presume it's going to have a widget in there, which ought to really help with the mouthfeel and the head. They are based out of Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Beer number two. This is Bear Brewing Company's Chocolate Milk Stout. 5.2% ABV on this one. They are based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this one has won multiple different awards, both at the World Beer Cup and the Great American Beer Festival gold medal winner. I don't know the exact dates, but I do know that it has won at those competitions. This specific beer is obviously, as the name implies, chocolate milk stout, so it's going to be sweetened with some added lactose. So two completely different directions for stouts, reasonably close to each other in ABV, and they both sound awesome, and I can't wait to jump in. So we're going to do exactly that. Starting with the Stable 12 Brewing Company's Basic B, this is the stout brewed with cinnamon, honey, nutmeg, and vanilla, clocking in at 6% ABV. Okay, jumping right into the first beer of today's flavored stout review, we have got Stable 12 Brewing Company's Basic B, stout brewed with cinnamon, honey, nutmeg, and vanilla, clocking in at 6% ABV, and it is a nitro stout, so it should have a nitro widget to help create a really lush mouthfeel and a really nice head for us. They are based out of Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. First beer I've ever had by Stable 12, and I am very excited to jump in. It sounds awesome. In terms of label art, it is quite basic, as their namesake. It's just got a horse, so I presume that's their branding, though I have no other reference, but I just presume based on the name that is their brand logo. Nonetheless, not much else to talk about there, so let's get this cracked. Listen. All right. And we'll get this poured right in the glass. Oh, okay. So it looks like this is a white stout, which I did not anticipate, but paired with the ingredient choice, it does kind of make some sense here. Not that I think it would be bad in a traditional dark stout, but in a blonde stout, quite nice. Now, in terms of color, you know, they call them blonde. They can run the gamut in terms of color, but this one is very much a caramelly orange color. And in terms of head, you know, it formed okay, but it looks like it's going to dissipate pretty quickly. So in terms of nitro, most nitro cans that I've had do a better job than that. But, you know, that notwithstanding, it's a nice looking beer. Let's give it a sniff. Okay. So in terms of aroma, it's not super pungent either. It does smell nice. You can clearly smell the malt bill, and you can smell some of the additives. I got a little hint of the honey, and just a whisper of the cinnamon, and just a hint of the vanilla. Nutmeg gets lost in there, but that's okay. We're going to jump in and see what actually comes through in the beer, so let's dive right in. Oh, that's a very tasty beer. Okay. Ooh. Yeah, the layers of flavor just keep rolling in and out of each other and exploring in and out and moving around the longer you let it rest after each sip. Okay, so the first thing I noticed when I got this in my mouth was it does not feel particularly big. The body on this beer doesn't feel that big, and the mouthfeel feels relatively flat, which surprises me given the nitro can, but that's the way it feels. Now, the first thing that happened after I swallowed was I got a really intense, what tasted very much like a classic, very roasty malt bill from a standard dark stout. It did not come through as I anticipated for a blonde stout. It very much tasted like it was brewed with very deeply roasted malts. Almost coffee and chocolate-like in the way that it presented its flavor. And then all of the other flavors that they added in started to move around. So I'm going to jump back in here and see if I can start to pick them out. Very roasty. You do get the honey and the vanilla up front in tandem with the roast. The cinnamon and the nutmeg really essentially get completely lost in this beer. The nutmeg you get just a hint of, but that cinnamon, I can't detect it anywhere. The other ingredients are just a bit too intense to let the cinnamon come through. I couldn't get it in the aroma. I'm not getting it in the flavor, but what I am getting flavor-wise tastes very, very nice. That it does. So you get the classic stout malt bill flavor up front, and then everything else that they added, sans the cinnamon, kind of mixing and working together and moving in and out. The honey and the vanilla really come through quite strongly. In nutmeg, you just get a hint of it in the back, and that's essentially where it remains. In terms of pungency, it's not overtly pungent. I wouldn't say it's one of those knock your socks off in terms of intensity of the flavor, but it is quite nice. And the same more or less rings true for the way that it finishes. It's not super long, it's not super short, but when it does get near the end of what you can still detect on each finish, it's very, very light, very mild, very, very subtle. But what you're left with is a dominant roasty malt with just a little bit of that honey and that vanilla. And the nutmeg's completely gone at that point, and the cinnamon never really makes its presence known. That's going to be a big caveat on this, but again, what I am tasting tastes quite nice. It's very well put together. I just personally wish that I could have gotten some of that cinnamon. It's one of my favorite ingredients really in any beverage, but particularly in a stout that's billed with these others together, would have been nice to get some of that cinnamon presence. I'm going to jump back in for final thoughts, and just as a reference, the body feels very, very medium light. Doesn't even feel medium, it's medium light. And that mouthfeel is not viscous at all. It's very much flat. It feels like water in the mouth. Does not get particularly creamy when you agitate it around. So there are some few quirks to this beer, but that said, overall, I really enjoy it. It tastes quite nice. I like the flavors, even though I would adjust the balance. I'm going to take my time, sip on this one, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get to our second beer of today's flavored stout review. That is Boxing Bear Brewing Company's Chocolate Milk Stout, and that one clocks in at 5.2% ABV. Okay, now moving on to the second beer of today's flavored stout review, we have got Boxing Bear Brewing Company's Chocolate Milk Stout. This one clocks in at 5.2% ABV, so a little lower than the prior. They are based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and this specific beer has won gold medals at both the World Beer Cup and the Great American Beer Festival. Yet another beer from a brewer that I have never had any prior, so I'm really excited to jump right in. In terms of label art, it's very plain, subdued, just has a bear on there, hence their boxing bear. It's got a boxing glove on it as well, though I know it's hard to see. And very clean, kind of labeled big chocolate milk stout down the side, so looks quite nice, very clean design. Let's get this one cracked. All right, and pour it right in the glass. Okay, pouring it in, it doesn't look super thick. It's a standard stout, so that's rather to be expected, but it looks reasonably effervescent. All right. And gave it a chance there to form a head, and it looked like it formed a pretty nice one. So, visually, this is not pitch black, but it is very, very dark. So they've got some very deep roasted malts in here. And at 5.2, the depth of the deep, rich blackness to the beer is really actually quite impressive. there is not much light getting through this, so they did a very good job because it's not super concentrated, only 5.2, but it's very, very dark indeed. And that formed quite a nice head on top. It looks really lush and creamy, almost like it was pulled off of a tap at a bar. So let's give this a sniff. Okay, so this is not super pungent in terms of aroma, but once you get up on it, you can smell it quite clearly. You can smell a nice mix of deep roast malts and a slight sweetness to it. And this does have lactose in it. It's a milk stout, and it smells quite nice. Now, they call it a chocolate milk stout, so I don't know if they added chocolate or it's just from the chocolate malts, but it does have a slight chocolatey aroma to it, so it smells quite nice. But nonetheless, formed a great head, looks great, smells great, and that's settled enough. Let's just jump right in. Well, it's a very nice beer. It's a very nice beer. Okay, so they call it chocolate milk stout. And overall, I would not really disagree with what they named it. It's got a nice, rich, roasted malt edge layering to it. That's the background. And it does have this nice roasty edge, but it definitely tastes chocolatey. So I don't know if they added chocolate or it's just the chocolate malts. But nonetheless, that flavor comes through, and then you add the lactose for this added sweetness, and it really does accentuate the chocolate element to it. Does it taste like chocolate milk in a glass of chocolate milk? No. But as a milk stout with chocolate, I think they nailed it, and it really does get accentuated and come through quite clearly in the beer. I'm going to jump back in and explore body and mouthfeel and how these flavors develop. In terms of body, it's medium, which at 5.2, it's got a good feel to it. It's got a good weight. It's actually a little bit bigger in the mouth. It's high end of medium, not medium heavy, but it's high end of medium, which is really more impressive than I expected for the ABV range. It's very, very nice. Mouthfeel, it's got a little bit of resistance, a little bit of thickness to it, but not that crazy. But as soon as you start to agitate it around your palate, it really does cream up and get very, very thick in the mouth. So overall, it feels quite nice in terms of breadth of body and the way that the mouthfeel kind of plays. It's very nice. It's got good presence. In terms of flavor, this is not a super overly complicated beer, but it's very, very tasty and it's quite nice. So the way that the flavor develops is not that complex, but what comes through really matches what they were going for with the name of the beer and certainly for the beer style. The added lactose does add that extra dimension to really play up that chocolate side from the malt. And it's possible there's chocolate in here. Honestly, I don't know. It didn't mention it on here at all. Just sweet, silky, delicious, stout, blah, blah, blah. Malt and, hints of roasted malt and chocolate. So yeah, it's possible they added chocolate to it, but it could just be coming from the roasted malts. And that could be the reason for the namesake. But it does taste quite nice. It's chocolatey and it's got a nice sweetness to it, but it absolutely does have that richness from the deep roast edge to the malt. It's very nice. I'm going to jump one more time into this beer for final thoughts. Up front, the first thing that hits you is that sweetness. It's got that sweetness, but the malt bill does come through quite clearly. It's very clearly, and it's a very deep roasted edge to the malts. It's got that chocolatey layer behind it. So you get sweet, you get malt, and then you get chocolate. And they're almost all in an even keel, so it's very, very, very well balanced. In terms of intensity of flavor, it doesn't go that crazy. This is a lighter beer. It's 5.2 for a milk stout. That's on the lower end, but it's still packed full of flavor. It's got a lot of presence. And in terms of the length of the finish, it doesn't stick around super long in terms of, say, some of the crazy high ABV, super pungent IPAs and imperial beers, but In terms of a standard stout ABV range, yeah, it's got a lot of staying power. It's got a lot of presence, and you get a lot that goes on at the end of the finish. And where it really tapers out, it's just this roasty edge with a little chocolatey sweetness. And it's very, very nice, very enjoyable. I'm going to take my time, sip on this beer, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with the Stable 12 Brewing Company's Basic B. This is a stout brewed with cinnamon, honey, nutmeg, and vanilla. Clocks in at 6% ABV, and they are based out of Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Starting with the aroma. The aroma was nice, but it wasn't overly pungent. I would say it was high end of average, and frankly, I couldn't pick out all of the ingredients that they put in, which I always like to get a sense. Not the biggest deal so long as it makes its presence known in the actual flavor profile, but as we've talked about many times, you taste first with your nose. So getting a good whiff of what the beer is about when you first crack it and it first starts to form, that really sets the stage for what you're going to get on the flavor side. This was nice, high end of average, it gets a 6. Moving on to the taste. Taste on this beer was also nice. Overall, I enjoyed it, but there were some missing elements. Notably, the nutmeg, it was just super subtle, and the cinnamon was completely gone from both the flavor and the aroma in this beer, which it's one of my favorite ingredients in the world and would have paired just beautifully with the honey and the vanilla that actually did make it through. It was high end of average, but I couldn't give it higher than that because the cinnamon was completely missing and it wasn't super pungent. Gets a 7 out of 10. For the body. The body on this, I was really quite taken aback, to be honest. 6% isn't a huge ABV, certainly for a standard stout. You could say it's on the high end. But in terms of the whole gamut of all beers and beer stouts, 6% isn't that high. But even for 6%, I expect there to be quite a lot more substance than this beer had, especially for a stout. It was medium light at best. It gets low end of average, it gets a 4. For the mouthfeel. The mouthfeel on this beer was another category where I was just kind of taken aback. This really did not feel like a stout at all. It was essentially as flat as water. There was no sense of creaminess at all, which I also found surprising because this claimed to be a nitro can. I don't see where they're coming up with that. Maybe this can was defective. I don't know. But for me, it gets just barely not failing completely. It gets a 1 out of 10. Moving on to the finish. Finish on this beer was pretty decent, actually. Even though the flavors weren't super pungent, they did have a pretty good bit of longevity and kept interplaying with one another. Really, for me, I just would have liked it to stick around a little longer and maybe make some of the other flavor elements known, and I didn't quite get that. It still gets above average. It gets a 7 out of 10. Head and retention. This beer formed a pretty decent head, considering it's from a can. I expected it to be far, far better because it bills itself as a nitro can, but again, I don't know where they're coming up with that. There seemed to be some element missing with this specific beer. Nonetheless, the head did form above average for a stout poured at home. It gets a 7 out of 10. Appearance-wise, this is a very nice looking stout, no doubt about it. It really looked like a darker version of a white stout. It wasn't a black stout. It was very deep amber, but it looked very, very nice. I didn't know that it was going to be that style of stout, but given the ingredients that they put in, I could have guessed it, but it doesn't bill itself as such. I only docked 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the balance. Overall, I did enjoy the balance of the beer. Really, for me, it was the missing cinnamon that I just did not get at all in the flavor or in the aroma. And then the nutmeg, I would have liked a little more intensity from that. The honey did come through quite nicely. The vanilla came through as well, which frankly, it's an ingredient that's so pungent, it's easy to overpower other ingredients. And I think that may have had some element at play here in this beer. But nonetheless, I still thought it was above average. It gets a 7 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. I expected to like this beer a whole heck of a lot more than I actually did. I didn't think it was bad. I just, based on what ingredients were in it, I really thought this was going to be a very, very special flavored stout. And for me, it really just kind of fell in the average range. I gave it high end of average, it gets a 6. Finally, as an example of the style, you know, there's a million flavored beers out there, and certainly stouts are no different. This is certainly a good one. It was enjoyable. I thought it was above average, but I would have liked all of the flavors that they took the time to put into the beer to come out. I think that there was a little bit of a balance issue that held this beer back. But I did still think it was above average. It gets a 7 out of 10. That brings the total score on Stable 12 Brewing Company's Basic B to a 61 out of 100. So this falls squarely in the high end of average range, and it's across all categories. There were elements I really liked, and there were elements that just I was kind of shocked that they were that weak in their presentation. But nonetheless, it was still an enjoyable beer. Moving on to beer number 2. This is Boxing Bear Brewing Company's Chocolate Milk Stout. 5.2% ABV on this one. They are based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this beer has won multiple gold medals both at the World Beer Cup and at the Great American Beer Festival. I don't know the exact years. I think it does say on the can, but honestly, it's written so small, there's no way I can read it, even with my glasses on. But nonetheless, starting with the aroma on this one. The aroma on this beer was fine. It was not pungent, and you really had to get down in the glass, but when you did, you could smell kind of a chocolatey sense, and you could get a decent sense of the malt bill. But overall, it was just average in terms of the way it presented itself. It gets a 5 out of 10. Moving on to the taste. Very good beer. I really did think overall, calling it Chocolate Milk Stout, it got the elements in there. It imparted some chocolate flavors, certainly, and you could still get the classic stout malt bill in there as well. And it did have this slight suggestion of sweetness. I wouldn't call it overtly sweet. Even though it was a milk stout, it was a lot more tame in its presentation, which for better or for worse, that's what I got out of it. I have had many, many stouts, Hubbard's Cave, Imperial Stouts notably. They have a lot more lactose in them, and it really helps accentuate the other ingredients on their dessert style beers. And really a chocolate milk stout, more or less is kind of a dessert style beer. I did enjoy it. It gets certainly above average for me. It gets an 8 out of 10. For the body. The body on this beer was excellent. For 5.2, I was really surprised at how big and robust it felt in the mouth. Very, very enjoyable. It had real presence. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the mouthfeel. Mouthfeel on this beer wasn't quite as impressive as the body on it was, but it did have some natural viscosity, and it had a little bit of creaminess if you agitated it around the palate, but it wasn't, you know, kind of far in reaching top tier status for me. I did think it was above average overall. It gets a 7 out of 10. Moving on to the finish. The finish on this beer was very impressive. Each sip lasted quite a long time, let alone for the ABV range. 5.2, that's not particularly high at all, but the pungency of the ingredients did come through and really helped extend out the finish. I only docked 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10. Head and retention. This beer formed such a better head by comparison to this one, which said it was a nitro. I was really very pleasantly surprised. Formed a nice, thick, lush, creamy head, and it really stuck around for an impressively long time. Considering port at home, not on a nitro tap, it did great. I only docked 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the appearance on this beer was fantastic. Again, this is not an Imperial, just a standard stout, 5.2%, and it had absolute depth of color. Sure, you could still see some light through it. It wasn't as dark as some, but it was far, far better than the average stout you're going to get. It was impressively deep. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Moving on to the balance. Balance on this beer was really quite nice. I appreciated the fact that the malts came through in this stout, knowing that it's a sweetened stout, it's a milk stout, and kind of playing up that chocolate edge. I did enjoy it, though for me, for a chocolate milk stout, I would have liked a little more chocolate intensity, maybe a slight bit more sweetness would have helped that. Not to say it was absent, don't get me wrong, not by any stretch. I just would have liked a little more intensity from that kind of play up the chocolate milk side. Only docked 2 points, it gets above average, it gets an 8 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. I really enjoyed this beer, especially on the heels of the first one. I was really expecting a lot out of this, and not to say that we're really comparing two beers here, but This one didn't really let me down. I was pleasantly surprised, more or less across the board with this beer, and I rated it accordingly. It gets well above average. It gets an 8 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, there's a whole lot of flavored milk stouts out there. This one was quite nice, and especially if you take into consideration the ABV range, 5.2, that's quite low. This beer had a whole lot of presence, and it had a whole lot of flavor and a whole lot of staying power. Really, for me, I just would have liked a little more intensity of the chocolate side, maybe just slightly more sweetness, just a little more lactose to play up that end, and actually even the roasty malt edge behind it, because it was clear that they had some deep roast malts in there that helped to play in with that chocolate side. I still thought it was above average. It gets a 7 out of 10, which brings the total score on Boxing Bear Brewing Company's Chocolate Milk Stout to an 81 out of 100. So well above average for this one, and we're looking at a 20-point spread between these two beers, and yeah, that's pretty much what I experienced as well when you come back and look at the numbers. I'm not saying that I disliked this beer, don't get me wrong. I did think it was enjoyable. I was just disappointed based on my expectations and what I actually got. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, you can click the notification bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.